Ottawa, members of a board of inquiry into 3 suicides at the Royal Military College of Canada have reported facing troubling delays and obstacles in obtaining key information and evidence during their nearly year-long internal investigation. A censored copy of the Board of Inquiry's final report was provided to reporters this week and confirmed that Officer Cadets Harrison Collaertes, Brett Cameron and Matthew Sullivan took their own lives in separate incidents. In 2016, members of a Board of Inquiry into 3 suicides at the Royal Military College of Canada have reported facing troubling delays and obstacles obtaining key information and evidence during their nearly year-long internal investigation. Lars Hagbert, the Canadian Press Archives. The scathing report also uncovered numerous gaps, shortcomings and worrying practices at the 142-year-old college in Kingston, ONT, where future generations of military officers are groomed when it came to suicide prevention. Those included the use of suicide watches with other students, even though studies showed such watches raised the risk of suicide among the watchers and had been previously flagged as a concern by the military's medical branch. In an interview with the Canadian Press, the military's chief of personnel acknowledged that there were shortcomings at the university and said senior commanders were committed to fixing them as quickly as possible. Article continued below. Bid Lieutenant Gen. Charles Lawmary rejected suggestions that officials at the college in Kingston, ONT, could have done more earlier to keep Collaertes, Cameron or Sullivan from taking their own lives. Folks were doing their best with what they knew at the time, and they thought they were doing the best that they could, Lawmary said during a telephone call from National Defence Headquarters. That's why it's so important to actually go through and do this critical self-examination and to put in place the changes that can prevent reoccurrence, and that's what's taken place. The Board of Inquiry report had been eagerly anticipated by the families of the 3 young men, who had expected it last year and expressed frustration and anger that its release was delayed, thereby depriving them of closure. Some had worried that the report was being delayed because officials were trying to whitewash the findings to hide any wrongdoing or negligence at the college or within the military chain of command. Military officials have rejected such allegations, saying the investigation was extremely complex, involving dozens of witnesses and tens of thousands of pages of documents, all of which needed to go through a final legal review. The 3 families have been briefed separately on the inquiry's findings over the past week, but have so far declined to comment. Article continued below. The report reveals that the Board of Inquiry faced challenges accessing information and evidence, particularly from the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, which investigates major crimes in the military, despite early indications by the CFNIS that the deaths were suicides. The report reads, and that suicides are not investigated by the CFNIS. It took over 6 months for the board to access critical evidence held by the CFNIS. It was also told at one point to file an access to information request and given blacked out material, despite the authority of the board to receive unredacted evidence. Despite previously defending a lengthy delay in releasing the report, Lawmary acknowledged the board's challenges getting information were wrong, and promised officials were committed to preventing future problems. While the exact circumstances around the 3 suicides were blacked out in the report provided to the media for privacy reasons, the board identified a number of concerns when it came to the risk of suicide among RMC students. Those included stigma, specifically student fears that asking for help would affect their future careers, which has also been identified as a concern within the overall military population. The board was also particularly concerned that RMC commanders regularly ordered students to act as a suicide watch or buddy watch when fellow officer cadets were deemed at risk of trying to take their own lives. 2 such suicide watches were ordered at RMC in the first half of 2016, even though studies had shown they increased the risk of suicide among the watchers, and the military's medical branch recommended against their use. Asked about the suicide watches, Lawmary said, "It says right there in the Board of Inquiry that there's a recognition that best practices and standards were not well understood throughout the cadet wing or the college itself, and again, that's one of the key recommendations, to standardize these things to make sure they understand what they are." RMC was also found to be missing an overarching suicide prevention strategy, which exists in other universities, given that suicide is the leading cause of death among young Canadians. The absence of such a strategy was found to make it more difficult for students to access support services. Officials also didn't know what constituted a suicide attempt or how many there had been and, unlike Queen's University, didn't have procedures to help students during their arrival at the college and other transitions. Finally, the report raised concerns about how college staff dealt with suicides after they occurred, saying there was an underestimation and misunderstanding of the effect of suicide on staff, friends and survivors of suicide loss. It was unclear from the report how many, if any, of the issues raised by the Board of Inquiry related to Colertas, Cameron and Sullivan, as the sections related to their time at RMC were largely blacked out. All told, the board made 78 recommendations to address the many issues raised in the report. But Laumeri said the vast majority were already being addressed following a special review of the college that was ordered by Defense Chief Gen. Jonathan Vance last year, and through the military's new suicide prevention strategy, there is a desire to make sure that all those things are being addressed, he said. The fact that 3 different initiatives are speaking to the same thing. I think it's a good indicator that folks are paying attention and trying to correct things where they can. Follow @LiberThiumi on Twitter.